By the time my cousin Marable decided I had outlived my usefulness, my body was still locked inside layers of plaster and steel, my legs suspended in a rigid cast that throbbed with every shift of weight. She stood at the top of the townhouse steps with her arms crossed, rain streaking down the glass behind her, and told me in a flat voice that I was now a liability. Not injured, not grieving, a liability. She said the words like she had rehearsed them, like they were pulled straight from a legal memo. She shoved a few damp bills into my palm, money that wouldn't cover a night anywhere safe, then kicked my suitcase so hard it cartwheeled down the steps and burst open in the mud. Clothes spilled out, darkening as rain soaked into them. My crutches slipped, and for a second I thought I would fall and crack the cast completely. She didn't flinch. She didn't look at me. Instead, she bent down and tore through the mailbox, ripping envelopes open with shaking fingers, scanning them, discarding them, her breathing sharp and uneven. That was the moment I understood this wasn't just cruelty. It was panic. She needed me gone, not because I was weak, but because I was inconvenient to whatever she was hiding. Silence had been my natural habitat for as long as I could remember. In our family, attention was oxygen, and Marable inhaled it greedily, leaving the rest of us to learn how to survive on scraps. She was loud, radiant, endlessly confident in public, the kind of person who could walk into a room and make strangers believe they owed her something. I learned early that speaking up only made things worse. If I challenged her version of events, I became the problem. If I stayed quiet, I became invisible, and invisibility was safer. Over time, that silence sharpened into something useful. I learned how to observe without being noticed, how to listen when people assumed I wasn't important enough to matter. I watched how Marable's smile tightened when she lied, how her voice rose just slightly when numbers didn't add up, how she grew reckless whenever she believed herself untouchable. While she was busy performing, I was studying patterns, learning how systems failed and how they could be quietly repaired before collapsing completely. Even my name became part of the routine humiliation. A clerical mistake at birth turned into a lifelong punchline she refused to let die. She repeated it in front of friends, colleagues, and strangers, always with a laugh that invited others to join in. I stopped correcting people because correction requires respect, and respect was never offered. Instead, I focused on being useful in ways she couldn't publicly mock. While she chased validation through curated photos and hollow celebrations, I sat in dim rooms surrounded by paperwork, unraveling financial disasters she pretended didn't exist. I learned to read bank statements like crime scenes, to follow money trails that twisted through shell accounts and questionable transfers. I didn't enjoy it, but I was good at it. Quietly good. And every time I cleaned up another mess she created, I told myself it was temporary, that one day she would slow down, grow up, or at least stop dragging everyone else toward the edge with her. There was a night, years before the accident, when the truth finally forced itself into the open. I was alone in an office long after midnight, staring at payroll projections that didn't lie no matter how badly I wanted them to. Dozens of employees were due to be paid in less than a week, and the operating account was nearly empty. I checked it 3 times, hoping I had misread something. I hadn't. Without telling anyone, I transferred my own savings, wiping out years of careful planning just to keep the doors open. My hands shook as I confirmed the transaction, exhaustion pressing down on my chest like weight. Moments later, my phone buzzed. Marable had posted photos from a private resort, barefoot on white sand, drink in hand, captioned with something about abundance and success. I stared at the screen until it went dark, and in that silence, I realized she wasn't careless because she didn't know better. She was careless because someone else always paid the price. The hospital stripped away whatever illusions I had left. Machines beeped steadily as my guardians lay motionless behind glass, tubes and wires doing what their bodies no longer could. I sat in a wheelchair with my leg elevated, signing forms that carried the weight of finality, my signature barely legible from shaking hands. Marable wasn't there for that. She was packing the hallway, voice echoing off sterile walls as she screamed at a legal advisor who refused to unlock accounts before official confirmations were issued. She didn't care about timing or dignity. She cared about access. When he refused again, calmly and professionally, she fired him on the spot, reducing decades of loyalty to nothing while death waited quietly a few feet away. I watched him walk past me without a word, humiliation etched across his face, and something inside me went cold and still. Grief drained out, replaced by clarity so sharp it hurt. When she expelled me from the house days later, the rain made everything feel unreal, like I was watching someone else's life unravel. I ended up in a roadside motel that smelled of cleaning chemicals and old regret, the kind of place people went when they had nowhere else to land. The heater rattled through the night, and I slept in damp clothes because I had nothing dry left. Hunger woke me before dawn, gnawing and persistent. The plastic card she had thrown at me lay on the table, and when I finally picked it up, I realized it wasn't money at all. No logo, no magnetic strip, just a thick access card with a handwritten code on the back. The number wasn't random. It was deliberate. A year burned into my memory. The year my guardians stopped trusting Marable with anything that mattered. The storage facility was quiet and cold, rows of metal doors stretching out under harsh fluorescent lights. Every step on my crutches sent pain shooting up my leg, but I kept moving, driven by something I couldn't yet name. When the door slid open, there was no treasure chest, no dramatic reveal, just a single envelope resting on the concrete floor like it had been waiting. Inside were documents, insurance papers. A policy written carefully, deliberately, nomming me and only me as the beneficiary. The amount wasn't extravagant, but it was enough to change direction. When I called the agent, relief flooded his voice. Marable had already tried to claim it. Loudly, aggressively, illegally. She had failed. The money would clear in a few days, days that suddenly felt like an eternity. Those days turned the motel room into a war room. I barely slept, barely ate, living on cheap food and colder determination. I spread papers across the bed, pulled records late into the night. Traced filings and notices that told a story Marable had been desperately hiding. What I found wasn't just mismanagement. It was deception layered on top of desperation. Forged approvals, loans taken out under false pretenses, interest rates designed to crush anyone who missed a single payment. The house she strutted around like a trophy was already bleeding value, foreclosure looming closer with every passing week. She wasn't running a business. She was outrunning consequences and losing ground with every step. I understood then that walking away would only delay the damage. People like Marable didn't stop when one victim escaped. They simply found another. The money I was about to receive wasn't an escape hatch. It was leverage. And leverage, when applied correctly, could end cycles instead of prolonging them. I didn't spend it on comfort or safety. I spent it on credibility. I built an entity that looked old, established, and bored with small talk. Every detail checked out because I made sure it did. I created layers between myself and the role I was about to play, knowing full well that distance was protection. When I reached out through formal channels, she responded almost immediately. Desperation erased her caution. Vanity erased the rest. She saw an opportunity and ran toward it without stopping to check the ground beneath her feet. When I asked for documentation, she sent it without hesitation, confident that appearance mattered more than accuracy. As I opened the files, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The numbers were wrong, not subtly wrong, blatantly wrong. Income inflated, expenses buried, reality rewritten in her favor. She had just documented her own downfall and handed it to someone she believed was there to save her. I leaned back in the creaking motel chair and let out a slow breath. The trap wasn't sprung yet, but it was built, and she was already walking toward it. The meeting was scheduled for a late afternoon when exhaustion makes people careless and shadows stretch long enough to hide mistakes. I chose a high-rise office overlooking the city, all glass and steel, the kind of place that makes visitors feel small before a single word is spoken. Rain streaked down the windows in slanted lines, blurring the skyline into something unstable, which felt appropriate. I arrived early, not to be seen, but to observe. From an adjacent room, I watched the security feed as Marable swept in late, shaking rain from her coat like she owned the building. She was dressed expensively, but not carefully. Loose threads showed at the hem, her confidence slightly overcompensated, her smile fixed too rigidly. She didn't thank the receptionist. She demanded water, specific and cold, already acting as though the money was hers. She paced, checked her phone, rehearsed success in her head. She had no idea. She was already standing on borrowed ground. She didn't read the documents when they were placed in front of her. She never did. She flipped pages until she found numbers that pleased her, ignoring clauses written in dense, precise language that would have terrified anyone who understood them. Confession of judgment. Immediate collateral transfer. No mediation. No appeal. The kind of terms only desperation accepts. She signed with a flourish, confident, impatient, irritated that the process wasn't moving faster. When the final signature dried, the room felt different, heavier, like pressure shifting before a storm breaks. She leaned back in her chair, already planning renovations, already spending money that had never been hers. That was when I stood and walked toward the door. When I entered, she didn't recognize me immediately. Power changes posture. It straightens spines, slows steps, sharpens eyes. I wore a tailored suit and leaned lightly on a cane, not because I needed it, but because it reminded me of where I'd started. Her confusion lasted only seconds before it curdled into anger. She laughed first, sharp and dismissive, then demanded to know why I was there. She turned to the legal advisor in the room, expecting him to remove me like an inconvenience. He didn't move. He looked at her with something close to pity. That was when understanding began to creep in, slow and unwelcome. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I explained debt ownership, transfer dates, legal authority. I slid documents across the table, each one a piece of reality she had avoided for too long. When I showed her the falsified records she had sent, her face drained of color. She tried denial first, then anger, then bargaining. She reminded me of family ties only when she needed them. I reminded her of rain-soaked clothes and a suitcase split open on concrete. I reminded her of being told I was expired. Liabilities, I explained calmly, don't get sympathy in balance sheets. They get resolved. She cried then, quietly at first, then openly, mascara streaking as the room remained brutally indifferent. I gave her options, not out of kindness, but because procedure matters. One path ended with signatures and silence. The other ended with investigators, warrants, and public records that would follow her forever. She stared out the window at the distorted city below, calculating pride against survival. In the end, survival won. Her hand shook as she signed, the pen scratching loudly in the quiet room. With that motion, everything she had taken without consequence finally caught up to her. Security escorted her out without ceremony. No shouting, no scene, just the soft click of a door closing behind her. I sat alone for a moment, listening to the rain, feeling something close to peace settle into my chest. Not triumph, not joy, resolution. The kind that comes when chaos finally stops pretending it's in control. I gathered the papers carefully, every page aligned, every edge squared. Order restored always looks boring from the outside. From the inside, it feels like breathing again. The aftermath unfolded quietly. There were filings, notices, settlements. She tried once to reach out, a late-night message filled with regret and rewritten history. I didn't respond. Silence had done enough work already. Within months, everything she had built on illusion collapsed under its own weight. The house sold. The business dissolved. The noise faded. People who once praised her moved on quickly, as they always do when the performance ends. I moved somewhere smaller, quieter, intentionally forgettable. I rebuilt my practice slowly, carefully, choosing clients who valued precision over spectacle. I slept better. I ate better. My leg healed, leaving only a faint ache when storms rolled in, a reminder rather than a wound. Sometimes I thought about the person I had been before all of it, the one who believed endurance was the same as loyalty. I understood now that endurance without boundaries is just another form of self-erasure. I never told anyone the full story, not because I was ashamed, but because stories like this tend to invite the wrong kind of attention. People like heroes and villains. They dislike accountants who close loopholes and apply pressure quietly until systems correct themselves. I was never interested in revenge. Revenge is emotional and messy. What I wanted was finality, clean numbers, closed accounts, balanced books. Some nights when rain hits the windows just right, I remember standing on those steps, soaked and discarded, told I had no value left. I think about how close she came to being right. Then I remember the envelope on a concrete floor, the numbers that told the truth, and the moment silence finally spoke back. Everything that was taken was accounted for in the end. Nothing more, nothing less.